I'm David May. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of CID Property Management's online training session. Today we're going to be talking about conducting board meetings. So let's start out with a definition of what a board meeting is according to the California Civil Code. Meetings of the board include any gathering of a majority of directors at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any items of business scheduled to be heard by the board, except those matters that may be discussed in executive session. So with that definition in mind, you normally would think of board sessions at the normal board meeting, at the clubhouse or at our office, that sort of thing. But there's other times, though, when you're going to have a board meeting, so let's take a look at a couple of those. Gatherings of a majority of the board at someone's house, or maybe at, just standing around the community talking. Maybe committee meetings where there are board members present. Social gatherings where you might be talking about board business. So you want to avoid doing those sorts of things outside of the normal board session, because otherwise it could be considered a board meeting, and members of the community could take you to task potentially for having a board meeting, an unauthorized board meeting, without proper notice. So even email or phone meetings can potentially be considered conducting a board meeting. So try to avoid those situations. Just confine your board meetings to the regular board session that you have, whether it's monthly or what have you. Now, a board meeting versus an annual meeting or a membership meeting, what's the difference? Basically, it's a membership meeting is where the members are all there, or those that choose to attend, and they are conducting whatever business, probably an annual meeting where there's an election. That's the type of membership meeting that you most likely deal with, or maybe a change in the CC&Rs where the members are all voting for that. But that's different from the regular board meeting. Today we're going to be talking just about the board meeting. So who's going to be there? Typically you're going to have your president. He'll be attending and facilitating the meeting. He will be guiding everybody along, keeping to the agenda, that sort of thing. You'll have your vice president. You'll have your treasurer who will be giving the financial report. You'll have the board secretary who will probably be taking the minutes for the board meeting. And you're going to have any members at large, as well as any community members that choose to attend the board meeting as well. Now, they may be attending, but they're not going to be a part of that board meeting per se, because they're not allowed to participate in the decision-making process. They're there simply to observe the process of the board meeting. They do have the open forum, but that's a different matter. They just, at the open forum, all they can do there is to just give their couple of minutes of input, and that's about it. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the purpose of the board meeting, though, is to conduct the business of the association. That's its primary function, the reason that you have the board meeting. To have that board meeting for any other purpose, it's not a social gathering or anything like that. It's to conduct the business of the association. The business of the association is going to include business, governance, and community issues. So let's look a little bit more at each of those sections, those three areas. Business meaning administrative things, where you might talk about state filings, annual disclosures, reserve studies. Your financial end might include budgets, talking about taxes, anything that has to do with anything financial, you'll have that aspect of it. And then any maintenance issues come under the kind of the general business heading there. Maintenance of the clubhouse or the pool or the common areas, landscape maintenance, those sorts of things. So those are all the business dealings that you're going to have in regards to that. Okay, governance, enforcement of communities' governing documents, the CC&Rs or covenants, conditions, and restrictions, your bylaws, your rules and regulations, and any changes that you might want to have in regards to, like in particular, the rules and regulations, because the board can change those. You have to go through the normal process, but just know that that's when you would, or those are the types of things that you would have in regards to any of the governance aspect of it. And then the community aspect of the board meetings has to do with communications in general with the homeowners via a newsletter or the website or those sorts of things where you would be talking about those aspects. Any conflict resolution would typically be there where the homeowners might have an issue with the board or a decision that's been made by a committee, like architectural committee, those sorts of things. So you might get into an alternate dispute resolution, or ADR as they call it. And so that might be one aspect of it. Any appeals by homeowners regarding CC&R violations or architectural review committee changes that they've tried to make and were denied on, those sorts of things would be under the community section of the board meeting. So one thing you want to remember though, in conducting the board meeting though, you want to stay focused, you want to know what the decisions are that are going to be made. You have to look at the possible solutions and resolutions to those. You want to prioritize for future events or future agenda items. So these are some of the things that you're going to prioritize and stay focused on during the board meeting. And you want to be prepared. In preparing for the meeting, there are going to be legal considerations that you'll have to look at. Preparing for decision making. We'll get into that a little bit later via the agendas, that sort of thing. And then board packets. We'll talk about those a little bit more later, and as well as the meeting site. So let's take a quick look at the meeting site here. You want to set up the board meeting room setup. It should be set up so that it's going to be conducive to conducting a good board meeting, an effective board meeting where all the board members are communicating effectively with each other. And the best way to do that is to set the stage, so to speak, so that the desks, or rather the tables in the room there where the board is going to be sitting at, will be set up in a shape such as it will be conducive to everybody seeing each other. So like you want to have either a U-shaped where everybody can see each other, or along that same line a semicircular shape, or a V-shaped, so that you just imagine all the board members being able to see each other wherever they're sitting. They can all see each other. They can communicate much more effectively that way. You don't want to set it up so that you're going to have the board in one line facing out to the homeowners, and the homeowners are facing the board. So it becomes the board versus the homeowners type of situation. You want to avoid that. And you also want to avoid the perception by the homeowners that they are actually a part of the board meeting, because they're not really. It's again, the board meeting is for conducting the business of the association. It's not for the homeowner meetings. It's more appropriate to have the board facing the homeowners during an annual meeting. And so that's the best way to set that up, is one of those other shapes. Okay. Legal considerations. Frequency requirements will be set up pretty much by the covenants or the bylaws, more likely, as to how frequently the board is supposed to meet. Typically it'll be once a month or once a quarter, but it will probably be set up. It also will be driven by the need for the association to have a board meeting. Maybe you'll need to have it more frequently than what it requires in the governing documents, but you have to just adjust according to the needs of the community. You also have legal considerations regarding the open session. The open session is where all the homeowners can observe if they choose to come. We know they won't always come, but they can be there if they want. But it does have to be done in open session. Most all decisions need to be open session, with the exception of what's done in the executive session. We'll get to that a little bit later, but the executive session is where you would have those more private items. You need to give proper notice, 4 days notice to include the agenda, as well as the notice of the meeting itself. And then, so those are the important things in regards to legal considerations. just make sure that in the process of going through that, you stay legal as much as possible. You're going to have your voting and all that sort of stuff that's going on at the board meeting where you're making the decisions. So let's talk about a little bit on parliamentary procedures. Now, governing documents may or may not specify what parliamentary procedure you are supposed to use. Probably it doesn't, but some do specify Robert's rules. But even if it specifies Robert's rules, you don't have to follow it to the T, because it's just you follow the general parliamentary procedures as set forth in Robert's rules. That's just a good guideline. So the general rule of thumb is go ahead and just follow the good basic parliamentary procedures, such as you see on the screen here: order, courtesy, majority rule, protection of rights, and justice. I mean, these are all standard things when you think about it. The order should consider one business item at a time, and courtesy, the rights of the individual should be respected and protected. That's standard kind of stuff. Majority rule, obviously, whatever the board decides, that's going to be the decision. And protection of the rights of the minority should be considered there as well, because you don't want to just steamroll over everybody. You need to consider them as well so that everybody feels like they've had a fair hearing. They feel like justice has been served. Even if the decision goes against them, they want to feel at least that they've had their day in court, so to speak, or their day with the board to make that decision. Okay, length of board meetings should really, as a general rule, should not go more than an hour. There's, as I said, a general rule. Now, I know the board meetings sometimes go longer than an hour in the open session, but you should try to hold it down to an hour or less. If you're properly prepared, if you go through the steps that we're going to be talking about and have talked about here, you'll be in good shape for getting through these board meetings in a pretty reasonable amount of time. Okay, executive session should take not more than about a half hour too. I mean, there might be things that are going on within the community that you need to spend a little extra time. Maybe some hearings are going on within the executive session. But as an overall rule, a half hour is a good time frame to shoot for there. And collectively, between the open session and the executive session, you shouldn't have more than a 2-hour time frame that you're looking at. Anything longer than that, you start to lose the interest of the board members, the board, the people that are there, the homeowners that are observing, and that sort of thing. And typically board meetings are held late at night, or at night anyway. So if you get going at 7 o'clock, you know, you're looking at 9 o'clock, and that's plenty late to have a board meeting wrapping up. You don't want to go to 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which is definitely excessive. So that is how you should, the length of time for conducting the board meeting. Preparing for decision making is important, as I indicated before. You want to be ready for the decision making process. You know when your board meetings are going to be, so you set those up and you're ready for them. You know that on the third Tuesday of every month you're going to have your board meeting. Frequency, again, it can vary depending on the governing document requirements, but you'll know that that's going to be coming up every so often, however often that may be. And then you want to be prepared in terms of establishing who will be having to cover each agenda item. So you want to have that delegated out ahead of time so that everybody's ready to cover whatever section they're going to be talking about. And then you want to verify that that person is already, that they're ready for that meeting when it comes time for their section to be taken care of. So how do you get prepared? One of the ways is through going through the board packet when you receive them. Now we send the board packets out usually 5 to 7 days or so ahead of time. So we'll send them out via email and also by a hard copy in the actual mail itself. And so you'll, within that, you're going to have your agenda. You start out with the agenda on the front page. You'll have your management report. You'll have your supporting documents that cover each of the agenda items. And you'll have your financials in there. For example, your budget, or not your budget, well, your budget might be in there as part of the whole agenda. But you also have your monthly balance sheet, your income expense statement, your general ledger, your bank statements, anything that has to do financially. Within the electronic version, you'll have the included. You'll also have all of the invoices there. So you'll have a complete picture, a complete package of what's going on financially. Also, you'll have anything that has to do with collections in there. So these are complete packages that you need to look at, you need to review, you need to have ready to go, so that when you get to the board meeting, you're ready to make those decisions. That way you can stay within that time frame that we talked about a minute ago. Taking a look at the agenda here on the screen, you'll see that there is a specific order, and this order will pretty much stay the way it is each month. You'll start out with a call to order. The open forum is where we have the homeowners have their few minutes of talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. We'll get into that in just a little bit more detail in a few minutes. You'll have the approval of the minutes, the report of the executive session. Let's go to that, cover that a second here. And the report of executive session is where the board president is going to review what has been decided on in the previous executive session. And so if there were decisions made during that, be it approval of the minutes and such and such contract before the proposal to do such and such in the community, okay, that would be, you just name what occurred or state what the decision made was for each of those. That's what that report on the executive session. You don't have details in there in regards to the homeowners, who was it, that sort of thing. That's not part of the report, but you just report in general terms. And then you have your financial report, any committee reports that you might have, and those should be kept down to a minimum. If their committee wants to have anything prepared that they can hand out to the board for whatever it is they might have been doing during the month, that's fine. But they should just zip right through that as to the report itself. And then your manager's report. Any old business will be conducted, any new business will be then conducted, and then you move to adjournment and probably to the executive session. The agenda requirements do require that you have that posted 96 hours ahead of time, either sent out in the mail or posted at the community center or on a bulletin board there in the community. Somehow you have to have that agenda posted ahead of time, 96 hours. And once that's posted, it's got to stay. You can't deviate from that and slip anything in at the last minute. So be aware that if it's not on the agenda, it cannot be discussed and decided upon by the board at the board meeting. So that's a very important consideration. Boards are not allowed to discuss or take action on any item not on the agenda with the following exceptions. Take a look at those. Meeting attendees may address the board during the open session, as I mentioned. Board members and their agents, including managers, may briefly respond to statements or questions from association members, ask clarifying questions, make brief announcements, or make brief reports on their own activities. But again, you're not going to be making any decisions based on that. They're just reporting. And so then another aspect, boards may refer certain informational matters and administrative tasks to its managers, agents, and staff, even if these items were not listed on the agenda. And then finally, any subject may be discussed and acted upon if there is an emergency. Emergency being the key word here, of course, if immediate action is needed on a matter which arose after the agenda was distributed, or if the agenda, or if the item was not on a recent item or agenda and was continued to the current meeting. So those are the areas that the parameters that you can discuss items during the open session. Now, these do not apply to executive sessions. What is covered in the executive session? Well, California Civil Code is very specific in regards to that. What can be discussed are matters of litigation that pertain to the association. Those are client attorney privilege conversations, those sorts of things. Any matters relating to the formation of contracts with third parties can be discussed in executive session. That's where you would be talking about different bids that are coming in. You'll want to certainly keep the homeowners apprised of what's going on in regards to any bid process, because there should be that done in open session. But when the bids actually come in, those items should be discussed in executive session as a general rule. And then member discipline, anything going on with members where you're having to discipline them, if it has to do with fine process, fine and hearing, it can be done in open, executive session. And any personnel matters, if you have any staff, janitorial or staff, pool staff, whatever it may be, if you have staff, those personnel matters would be discussed typically in executive session as well. Meetings with a member upon the member's request regarding the member's payment of assessments as specified in section 1367. So those are the areas that you can talk about in executive session, and that's okay. Other areas, areas other than that would be discussed in open session. So it's important to be prepared when you go into the board meeting, as I've mentioned, so that before the board meeting you should review those board packets that you receive. You should read the supporting material provided on the agenda items, because you don't want to be trying to play catch up while everybody's sitting around twiddling their thumbs. If they were all prepared and you're not, you don't want to have a situation like that, because that's just drags the board meeting on too long. You can get certainly clarification, discussion. That's during the discussion end of when somebody has made a motion. But after that, you discuss it and make the decision. That's not the time to be reading in depth and reviewing the whole process at that point in time. You want to be ready to discuss and vote. That's the whole point of doing this ahead of time. And then you want to make sure that you've reviewed all the financials as well in your preparation for the board meeting. So a quick note on board meeting minutes. We'll cover that in another session with the secretary and some of the more detailed information for the board secretary. But the board minutes, as a general rule, I'd like you to know that the board minutes are a legal document that can be used in a court of law. That's important to remember, because that's why you don't want to have a verbatim discussion about what all went on at the board meeting. Mary said this and John yelled at her, and a homeowner said such and such. You don't want to get into those kind of detailed verbatim discussions. This is not a tape recording. You go home and transcribe it. And that's where a lot of secretaries get a little, board secretaries get a little freaked out by the idea of them even having to be the board secretary, because if they think that they're going to have to do the verbatim long 10-page board minutes, and I've seen those, and they're painful to read. Interesting reading sometimes, but bad form, because you don't want to have all that stuff, because that, again, could be entered into a court of law. Just primarily contain what was motioned on and voted, what was motioned and voted on. So keep that in mind. Up on the board, on the screen, you'll see a sample of board meeting minutes. And you can see pretty much what is on there. You've got a number of things there that will be covered in the minutes, and so you want to make sure that you have the who's there and who was absent, approval of the minutes, the reports, the business that was done, any voting that was done. So they should all state the type, like I said, the type of meeting, regular, special, the name of the group, the date and time of the meeting, the place, not always the same, so you need to make sure you include that. The presence of the president and secretary, their substitutes, the presence of a quorum, the names of the people present, action taken on the minutes of the previous meeting and corrections, if any, exact wording of each motion, and the result of each vote, and then the hour of adjournment. So you just want to kind of recap here. The board meetings should go through fairly quickly, rapidly. If you're prepared, you're ready to go in there, talk briefly about what your thought process was in reviewing the documents. You're ready to make the vote and move on to the next item. That's why if you do that, you can, in fact, keep that board meeting probably under an hour, and you can keep your executive sessions under a half hour. And that's really the ideal setup there. Again, it's not a social gathering. It's not a time to just sit around and talk old times or anything like that. Let's get down to it, keep the meeting moving. You can talk and kibitz and do all that kind of stuff later after the board meeting is over, but not before, not during the board meeting. And boards are to set policy and make decisions. That's your primary responsibility. You don't want to get overly involved in the day-to-day operations, but rather leave that to the committees, to the management, to volunteers. And I know that a lot of the boards are in fact the sum total of the committee as well. So if you can get more committee volunteers from the community to participate, all the better, because the board should be doing the board's business and the committees should be doing their business. And that way nobody gets overly taxed with time and energy, and you don't get burned out. You want to avoid the burnout, the board burnout. So you do a 2-year stint and then you just can't wait to get off of the board. It shouldn't be that bad. It's good to rotate through too, also to get new blood in there and new perspectives, community perspectives, new members coming in from the community. That's all good. So, but you don't want to get overly involved if at all possible. Leave that to the committees. Let them do their legwork. You do your work, and everybody comes out of there. They're not getting burned out. So, have a good time. Have fun with the board, being on the board. It is a big responsibility because the buck does stop at the board, not with the management company, but with the board. And so those are important things to keep in consideration. Anytime during the month that you do have questions, please feel free to contact us and we'll help answer the question, get you on the right track in terms of being on the board or answering questions or helping you with the decision-making process there. So thank you very much for tuning in to this session. We appreciate your time, and better management through education. That's our motto. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.